Dear listener, welcome to today's program. In our studios today, we have Humphrey Kigana from Art of Life, Nairobi. Welcome, Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amadi.
What fundamental rights does everyone require even though we are going through difficult times of COVID-19, even as we consider the Kenyan Constitution and the international treaties that Kenya is a signatory?
Well, in Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Kenya, it sets out the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is an integral part of Kenya's democratic state. And it states that all Kenyans have a number of rights. One, every Kenyan has a right to the highest attainable standard of health. Every Kenyan has a right to accessible and adequate housing and reasonable standards of sanitation. Every Kenyan has a right to be free from hunger and to have adequate food. Every Kenyan has a right to clean and safe water in adequate quantities. Every Kenyan has a right to social security and the right to education, just but to mention a few.
Thank you very much, Mr. Humphrey, for that explanation. What importance does the adherence to these rights have, especially during this time when we are dealing with the corona pandemic?
According to the US Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he recently stated that embracing the rights is simply part of trying to curb the pandemic, because as we respect the rights, we are now in a position to control the pandemic to kill our people. So COVID-19 is about human rights. It's affecting all human rights in their indivisibility and their independence. Therefore, our well-being is very important, because tomorrow we'll be there and we'll be able to work, not necessarily looking for money when we are suffering. So it's important for human beings to consider health first before other things.
Thank you. Has the COVID-19 situation degraded some of these fundamental rights?
Actually, governments and cities across the world have taken extraordinary steps in response to, the COVID-19. This includes actions requiring national population to stay inside, the travel bans, and restrictions on public gathering. So the restrictions have degraded some human rights, such as the freedom of movement, the right to housing, the right to the highest attainable standards of health, the right to be free from hunger, the right to clean and safe water in adequate quantities, the right to education, the right to equality and freedom from discrimination, and the right to inherent dignity and the right to have the dignity respected as well.
Though we have our fundamental rights, there are roles too. What are our roles and which are the government's roles?
Our roles include adhering to the public health measures that have been put in place by the government through CS Mr. Kagwe. We should also desist from engaging in discriminative acts such as racism, xenophobia, hate speech, stigma, and promote inclusive and unity. So the government's role includes ensuring that national and local recovery measures address disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people living in poverty, those without access to water and sanitation or adequate housing, persons with disability, women, older persons, children, and people in detention or institutions. So government also need to reorganize the greater public health risk of women and girls to violence. The health sector, despite being stretched, can take some steps to mitigate harms caused by violence. And if this is done, then we are good.
As we approach to the end of this interview, do you think there are human rights that have not been adhered to, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic? Which are these rights and why?
There are a number of human rights violations that have taken place during this COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, the right to equality and freedom from discrimination. It has been violated. In Kenya, for instance, we have seen rising cases of discrimination, hate speech, ageism, xenophobia, racism, or violence. Stigma and discrimination has also been directed to all persons, especially the people suffering from COVID. The right to education also has been violated. Girls and boys are at home. The freedom of movement has also been violated. We are not allowed to move, and this is not good. The right to housing, staying at home, and practicing physical distance is extremely hard for the people living in overcrowded conditions, such as slums. And this has also posed a challenge on our rights.
Considering human right access to basic needs, what are your last comment?
Now, we have seen how the virus does not discriminate from the mighty to the poorest, exposing us into this danger. So we must make sure the guidelines that are put across are there to by all and sundry. So the best response is one that responds proportionately to immediate threats. We are not supposed to sit back and say we are not sick. We must do something to stop the disease coming into our lives. And then another thing, we need to understand that the government is simply trying to talk on our behalf. We have heard and we have seen people dying. Let us not wait until the government tells you put on a mask. Just put on a mask because you are security to your own life. And if you take care of your life today, you live tomorrow. So thank you, and I expect that if these guidelines are made or followed, then we are good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Humphrey Kigana, for having time for us. We have come to the end of our interview, which has been brought to you by this radio station.